American society is falling apart. Media and government clash as they debate on what is right and what could be made right. War breaks out over financial matters and deeper economic control. At Lady Liberty's, JP cooks burgers as he dances and jams to his tunes. His co-worker Anita walks up to him and asks if he could cover for her at the drive-thru. Even with his shift about to end, JP gives in. A customer drives up and orders his food done differently. Following store policy, JP says that they can't make it to order. The customer flexes his car and calls JP a slur. JP responds by announcing the discrimination over the microphone. Defeated, the customer drives away as they give JP the finger. Another car drives in with his sister, Lily, and some other girls inside. JP offers Andrea, the driver, a milkshake, trying to flirt with her. The two exchange some quick banter about Andrea being vegan. Lily takes the milkshake from her brother. She tells him that they need to get home by 8 o'clock. JP asks why, and Lily doesn't tell him immediately. Andrea cheerfully announces that Lily got into Columbia University. Lily tells JP that they'll talk about it later. JP is left at the drive-thru, a little bit sadder. JP calls their mom. She tells him that Lily needs his support right now, and that she expects him to show up to dinner that night. Shortly, Scott, another worker, ambushes JP in a makeshift paper mask. He takes a video of JP mocking him. He puts the phone away when JP tells the camera one of Scott's childhood traumas. Scott asks how JP feels about Lily getting into college. JP says he's fine with it, and is excited to move to New York. Scott jokes that they'll find some girls over there, and imagines the many intimate things they can do together. Scott asks JP to help in moving the stock into the freezer. JP declines, but as he walks away, Scott pulls out pulling his friend in to help. The two friends walk down the street. Scott jokes that JP's move with Andrea earlier was weak. Scott jokes that maybe JP should have offered Andrea pickles instead of a milkshake. As JP cycles away, a billboard atop a roof displays the electoral campaign material of a certain Harper Finn. His campaign line reads, "Remember who we are." JP arrives home. He cleans up as Lily walks into the room, taking pictures of him. She jokes that she will be sending the photos to Andrea. JP congratulates Lily, saying that he is proud of her. Lily says that if JP does try, he could still get into college. JP explains that there are two types of people in the world, workers and hustlers. He claims to be more like the latter, as he plans a big future for their mom. As they are about to take a picture to send to their mom, JP notices that Lily has gotten a tattoo of a butterfly behind her ear. She asks him to keep it secret. He promises to do so. The party starts. Lily tosses JP an origami piece that reads, "Dork." They each throw a loser on each other's forehead. The two appear to be very close to each other. Their mother calls for a toast. She congratulates Lily on her accomplishments. Lily says that JP will be able to take care of things after she goes. Then, a bright light shines outside the house, and ICE agents barge into their door. They are all pinned onto the floor to be arrested. The news picks up on the series of ICE raids that happened that night. They say that this was a political move by Governor Finn to secure votes for the upcoming election. Governor Finn addresses the news, saying that there will be zero tolerance for the immigrants. Immigrants are confined into Zone 45. JP, locked in a cage, sees Lily being taken away by a bus. She ignores his calls. JP begins to feel helpless. Time passes. JP wakes up and sees a discriminating message on the wall. The guards have brought in dogs to keep the immigrants in line. Lisa, a civil rights lawyer, meets with JP. He recognizes her from the news. She tells him that while there are efforts to overturn Finn's executive order, they failed. The governor plans to extend this policy until the elections are over. Finn plans to deport all immigrants before election day happens. Lisa suggests that someone of American birth must recognize JP's mother as their legal family. If they do, they'll be spared from deportation. JP suggests that maybe he and his sister could do that, but unfortunately, they're still in state custody. Lisa presents an alternative solution that could help JP. He simply has to volunteer for and accomplish the Elderly American Tolerance and Understanding Project. JP, realizing that he doesn't truly have a choice, gets to work. JP is joined by Camila Montes, an activist, Chris Morales, a paranoid, Big Mac, a self-proclaimed Lady Charmer, and Micah Fuentes, a vegan Democrat socialist. Each of them toys around with the interviewing agents, poking fun at the absurd situation they find themselves in. The program officer attaches ankle monitors onto the volunteers to check if the volunteers are back in their rooms after curfew. The anklets will activate 5 minutes after it sees that the volunteers aren't in their rooms. Eddie Davis, the founder of the Elderly American Tolerance and Understanding Project, meets with the group when they reach the state manor. Davis thanks them for volunteering and promises them that maybe they will find a new appreciation for life. Davis calls on his assistants, Cynthia and James, to guide the group. The assistants tour the group around the manor. They visit the bedrooms, the water therapy rooms, and the common area. The team will primarily be in charge of entertaining the elderly guests. Lastly, they go out onto the garden. Greta, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, stares JP down. At lunchtime, Big Mac complains about the nasty meatloaf. He jokes that Micah should maybe try and use her white privilege to their advantage. Micah responds, saying that while she may be white, she's more Argentinian. Chris complains about having to deal with the elderly. He shares that he sent his own grandfather to a nursing home and it served him well. Big Mac jokes that he might try out some lovemaking with some of the older women. Big Mac shares that he wants some of Lady Liberty's fish fillets. JP tells the group that the meat they use isn't at all meat. Camilla leaves them at the table, annoyed that the group is treating their situation too lightly. With exchanges all done, James brings them a change of clothes. They go to the common area and choose their partners for the afternoon. JP spots the woman from the garden and goes over to her. JP introduces himself to her. Seeing that the elderly woman isn't responding to JP, Micah offers a helping hand. She takes a book from the nearby trolley and suggests that JP should read to her. JP begins to read to her. The elderly woman wheezes, as if trying to tell him something. He continues to read, and the woman struggles to say something. Cynthia comes over and injects the woman with a sedative. JP is left confused as to what he did. Chris plans to break out of the manor. He tells the group about an observation window behind them. He is convinced that someone is behind the window, watching everything they do. Micah tells him to try leaving the room. Chris heads for the door and pulls on the lock knob. Alarms go off, and 2 guards come to him. They each tase Chris until he can no longer stand. They carry Chris away into another room. That night, JP gets up to go to the bathroom. He sees a barn owl sitting across an open window, but pays it no mind. On his way back into their room, he hears a muttering in a shadowy corner. Mrs. Wells reveals herself, naked and afraid. She tells him that a certain Virgil will set them free. She pushes JP onto the floor, repeating the same phrases again and again. A group of nurses retrieve Mrs. Wells. After injecting her with a sedative, James reactivates JP's anklet before leaving. The day after, Davis apologizes for the inconveniences caused by Mrs. Wells's escape. He proposes to have the group see the rest of the institute. Big Mac notices that Chris is still nowhere to be found. Davis brings them to Ward B, where they keep patients with severe dementia or Alzheimer's. JP will be working with James there. James fools around with a strapped-in Mr. Yates. JP calls him out for the misbehavior, but James brushes it off as Eddie appears behind them. JP explains that he's just showing the newbie the ropes. As they unstrap Mr. Yates, another patient gets up and bites into JP's arm. James wrestles the other man down just as JP passes out from the shock. JP wakes up in the infirmary and sees Lily. She tells him that she was just around the area. JP makes a loser sign on his forehead as Lily walks to a window. She reminds JP of his promise to take care of things. Then the walls begin to bleed as a massive cloud of blood appears in the window panes. JP wakes up from the nightmare. Micah greets him. They share a moment, as Micah says she prefers JP's company to the others. JP says that the institute treats their patients more like cattle than actual people. Micah suggests that maybe they could try and teach the others to treat them better. Back in the cafeteria, Big Mac complains about the noodles. Cynthia comes to them, telling them to finish up. Camilla asks her about Chris. She says that he's been sent back to the detention center for having violated their policy. After Cynthia leaves, Big Mac shows them Chris's inhaler. He knows that Cynthia is lying. Big Mac goes to Mr. Phillips' room for movies. He brings Greta as a date for Mr. Phillips. As Big Mac tries to understand how to work a DVD player, Mr. Phillips raises his hand towards him. His fingers crunch into each other as Greta struggles to say a word. Mr. Phillips struggles to breathe and, eventually, stops breathing. Big Mac walks up to check on him. Panicked, he asks the elderly woman if she saw what happened to Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips gets up and growls. His body contorts as he falls to the floor. He tries to stand, but collapses and stops moving entirely. Mr. Phillips, with his skeleton contorting inside his frail body, begins to crawl towards Big Mac. Big Mac runs for it and leaves Greta screaming for her life. The following day, Big Mac tries to explain how strange the events last night were. Davis tries to explain the circumstances to the staff and volunteers. He doesn't know what happened to Mr. Phillips, but ensures that the institute is investigating it. After dismissing the group, Davis asks JP to come with him. Davis introduces JP to Virgil, the barn owl from nights before. Davis says that Virgil is trained to remove any foreign elements from the estate, much like how Governor Finn is doing with the immigrants he plans on removing from the country. Davis tells JP and James that he needs to be able to trust them to work better for his business. Davis tells the two to hug out their differences. They do, but JP grabs the opportunity to steal James's key ring. That night, JP removes his anklet. He goes to Big Mac's room and finds him dancing to himself in a bathrobe and facial cream. Big Mac says he isn't ashamed of it, but is obviously embarrassed after getting caught. JP proceeds to visit Camilla. He removes her anklet too. Camilla jokes that she also wants to make a move on Micah. Shortly after, JP goes to visit Micah and invites her to go swimming. Even past curfew, the group goes swimming at the therapy pools. JP and Micah share a moment in the smaller pool. Micah tells JP about the feeling of the senses coming together in a perfect way. In the end, they share an intimate kiss. In the infirmary, JP and Micah prepare to get even more intimate. The morning after, JP wakes up in the infirmary next to Mrs. Wilcox, another elderly woman. He panics and launches himself off the bed. Micah walks in, retrieves Mrs. Wilcox, and looks at JP knowingly. In the gardens, JP and Big Mac joke around about last night's events. JP sees Greta across from them and comes up to ask her about the cootie catcher she's holding. It was just like the ones Lily and he would make. Greta immediately grabs JP by the hand and groans, trying to tell him something. Then the other nurses take Greta away. The group gathers, and JP notices that Camilla has a weird marking behind her neck. Big Mac and Camilla don't remember much about last night. They all believe that something is majorly suspicious about the place. Back in his room, JP plays around with the cootie catcher that he got from Greta. Expectantly, he pulls it open to see if it has the same messages that Lily would put inside. Inside, he sees a terrifying message: help. JP sneaks around to visit Greta. The lights turn on, and he hides under Greta's bed. Cynthia and James walk into the room. They say that they will be upping Greta's dosage to make their lives easier, and that it is just a matter of days before something happens to Greta. After the two nurses leave, JP checks on Greta. He lifts her hair behind the ear and sees a butterfly tattoo, the same one that Lily got. Realizing this, JP makes a run for it, but is immediately met by a straight punch to the face from James. The morning after, Big Mac finally gets to enjoy a delicious burger since Camilla is working in the kitchen. They notice that JP is missing, and suspect that Cynthia has lied to them about where he might be. Big Mac comes up with an idea. The group decides on how to alert each other during their operation. Big Mac suggests the classic caw-caw bird call, much to their group's hesitation. Big Mac and Micah infiltrate an office to look for records. Big Mac picks the lock on the drawer. Inside, they find blueprints for an industrial machine. They hear James coming around and quickly hide. James pulls out a bottle of brandy and talks to himself for a bit. Just as he leaves, Big Mac and Micah stand to follow him. James does come back to hide the brandy bottle, which makes the duo hide again. In a hidden laboratory, JP wakes up next to two other volunteers. He sees that half their faces have aged significantly, almost like the patients' faces. His face is the same. As Camilla wheels in an elderly man, Big Mac tries to explain their findings to her. James appears behind him and asks him to help him out with fixing a vent. Big Mac gets onto a ladder to fix it. The elderly man drops his food onto the floor, and Camilla picks it up. When she turns around, the elderly man has disappeared from his wheelchair. The elderly man attacks an unsuspecting Cynthia. A larger nurse restrains him, but topples the ladder that Big Mac is on. Big Mac falls to the floor and is knocked unconscious. The larger nurses take the elderly man away. In the laboratory, James receives a call for backup. JP observes the nurse press the number pad and gets the lock code easily. He breaks away from his restraints too. Back at Lady Liberty's, business is booming. Governor Finn and Davis talk about the success that their product has made. The customers and Davis's kids seem to enjoy it. No one can tell the difference either. JP crawls on the laboratory floor. He makes his way to the door, but fails to input the right code. He remembers Mrs. Wells saying that Virgil will set him free. He inputs Virgil and unlocks the door. James hears the beeping, but it is too late. Big Mac wakes up, but keeps quiet as he is rolled into the infirmary. Cynthia plans to inject him with adrenaline to wake him up. James calls them over the radio, and they leave Big Mac in the room. Big Mac, coming to the aid of his friend, eyes the loaded syringe. JP finds the production center, with packaged in plastics and hauled over to an industrial grinder. They are turning into burger patties and other meat products. Horrified, he runs to escape. He finds Micah and tells her about what is happening. James comes around and corners them. Then and there, Micah, in an act of betrayal, plunges a sedative into him. As he loses consciousness, Micah tells him that she doesn't work with people like JP. JP wakes up in the production center. Davis tells JP not to be afraid, as fear spoils the meat. He explains that people like JP are spoiling America and must be removed. Micah walks in and Davis greets her as his spy. Davis commends JP's people for having helped build the world that people like Davis enjoy now. He also thanks JP's lawyer for helping them get more resources for their enterprise. With the future of their enterprise reaching full-on automation, they will no longer be needing people like JP, except for their bodies, for consumption. Back in her room, Camilla tries to break free from her anklet. A key slides down from the vents above. With a caw-caw, Camilla knows it was Big Mac. Camilla reaches the cafeteria. She picks up a chair and smashes the window that Chris believed was an observation room. Inside, a cluster of computers and files sit atop a desk. Chris was right. Frozen in shock, Camilla is taken by a nurse. Micah tells JP how she once feared having her privileges. That is, until she met Eddie. JP is only concerned about her sister. Micah tells him that she is still alive for now. The poor girl has been ever since she got there. Micah goes into detail about their process, how the water is too, and how hormone injections slowly tenderize lean muscle to tender meats. Over time, what once was a living becomes the perfect livestock. Since no one likes seeing the elderly suffer, no one gets to see what Davis and company do to them. Micah reiterates the existence of a natural order of the world, and people like her exist to enforce it. A Lady Liberty's commercial plays on the television, as JP and a now similarly aged Camilla meet in a lobby. JP is hooked up to a catheter. With Big Mac nowhere to be seen, JP plots their escape. They will take their chance after dinner. JP visits Lily. He tells her about their mother. They cry as they remember fond memories. JP promises to get them out of there. That night, Micah, James, and Cynthia visit JP's area. As they try to sedate Camilla, the other elderly stand up and surround them. Cornered, the elderly attack them as JP makes his escape. Bruce, a security guard, finds JP and chases him into a staff room. JP ambushes him, but Bruce has the upper hand. With JP weak and on the floor, Bruce pulls out the catheter forcefully. Crawling through the vents, Big Mac finds JP being strangled by Bruce. He jumps down and wraps the catheter tube around the guard's neck. Bruce falls unconscious. The alarms are raised. The mob of the elderly clashes with the nurses as JP clings onto Big Mac. They manage to escape the crowd. Nearing the exit, James tries to tackle JP. Big Mac smashes a wooden chair on his head. JP, Camilla, and Lily get onto the elevator. The elevator goes below the lowest floor and arrives at the production center. JP leaves them in the cabin to search for another exit. Upstairs, Big Mac rallies the elderly to bring down the institute. He takes them outside, where they come across a jogger. Trying to borrow her phone, JP scares off the jogger. JP finds an aged Chris alive, but in a cage. Davis ambushes JP from behind and chokes him. JP smashes a jar on Davis's head, and Chris puts the man in a headlock. With their weakened bodies, Davis overpowers them and smashes JP's head onto a dashboard. Davis drags JP's limp body to the grinding station and activates it. Camilla stealthily walks up to Davis, armed with a wooden plank. She knocks him out effectively, saving JP just in time. Davis gets back up, throwing Camilla away. Chris begins to transform. Lily presses a button and releases him from his cage. In his final gasps for life, a transformed Chris reaches across Davis's jaw and rips it off his head. Incapacitated, Davis slowly rolls towards the grinding station. The following morning, exhausted by their terrifying adventure, JP and Camilla sit at a bench overlooking the cityscape. Big Mac finds them and celebrates. He shortly realizes that both of his friends have gone unconscious. The news has picked up on the travesties. With his Lady Liberty's chain closed, Governor Finn is reported to have fled the country. Lisa and all of those who conspired with Davis have also been arrested. The imprisoned immigrants are released. Big Mac realizes that JP and Camilla are joking with him. The trio laugh it off, despite the roller coaster of emotions they had to deal with over the past days.